Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Self-Achievement Network. One more time, I'm your host, Domenic Certa. Welcome to everyone, those of you near and far, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're at in the world. With me in the background is my cousin, Gina. And I'm going to bring her on camera and let her introduce herself. She's right there. She is all about wine. Sommelier. Not quite sure exactly pronunciation. There she is. Look at this.
Hello. Long time no see.
I know technology is amazing. It works.
Yep.
It's
Good morning.
it's all about the practice. Good morning.
That's right. Thank goodness for practice.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited about hearing about your journey and about, in the wine industry and how you got interested in it. I know it's been your passion for a number of years. We've known each other for, let's see, I would guess like 40 some odd years.
45 and 10 months. So something like that. 45 and 9 months maybe.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. Um, you know, I remember our childhood and joining in to I was the guy that was cranking on the funnel thing when they were our grandpa was making grapes. Well, my grandpa, your great grandpa,
Right.
and so many great memories of that. And I know that wine touches so many people. I really just want to know right now. Just tell us about you, where you grew up. Tell us, how you got interested in wine. I mean,
Well, who doesn't love wine, right? I mean, I have some handy. Do you have? All right.
it's
Nice.
still breakfast time here, but just in case.
Hey, there's breakfast. There are definitely breakfast wines. I prefer sparkling with breakfast, but hey, to each his own. So yeah, well, it's something that you touched on. I have to say hi to my friend Emily, who's watching. Hey, Emily. That is
Hi,
awesome.
Emily.
Emily is a colleague of mine on the Michigan Wine Collaborative. She is the best thing that ever happened to us. So anyway, but my passion for wine started with our shared heritage of grapes, because your grandfather, my great grandfather, grew grapes in the backyard in Hammond, Indiana. So we both grew up in Northwest Indiana, which is called the region by pretty much the rest of the state of Indiana, because it is very unique in that it's urban, suburb of Chicago versus really being associated with the rest of the state. We
Right.
root for the Bears and the Bulls. We don't know much about the Colts and whoever else plays in Indianapolis. So anyway.
Well, I always tell people I'm from the deep south side of Chicago.
Pretty much, it's Chicago TV, Chicago radio. You grow up with the Chicago accent as opposed to the rest of Indiana. Yeah, so it's kind of a cool place. But so great grandpa, my great grandpa, your grandfather grew grapes in the backyard. His son, my grandfather, your uncle, continued that tradition when he moved to Crown Point. He grew grapes in the backyard, and strangely enough, nobody in the family was really interested in the grapes besides me and my cousin Randy Glorioso used to help harvest grapes with grandpa and me. But every September I would get the call from grandpa saying, Gina, the grapes are ready. And that would mean that I would get on my bike and I would ride, he'd say, when you're done with school, come over a couple days and we'll pull these grapes off, or on a Saturday. Cause it wasn't, it wasn't the end of the world if they hung another couple of days. It's not, it wasn't a commercial venture. So it was just wine for use in the family. And so he would call me and I would go and I would pick grapes with him every September. And if Randy was around, this is before they had moved to Illinois. He was still small enough, but I think I started harvesting with him when I was about 9. And so, since then I have always loved to eat wine grapes just as a snack, as opposed to table grapes that you buy at the store, the big giant green and red ones. But yeah, so that was I think my earliest indoctrination. And honestly cannot remember drinking much of the resulting wine. I think I was just more into it, that it gave me a unique thing that I got to enjoy with my grandpa. And being the oldest of 22 first cousins in that section of the family, that was really neat to have something that was just unique for us, because it, you know, I was the oldest, so I had known the grandparents the longest, but you still like to have something unique that solidifies that relationship when you're a little kid. So that was cool.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it was this very similar experience. I got the call from my dad and my grandpa, your great grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And we would drive all the way up to your neck of the woods in Michigan. That's where you're at. You're close to Detroit right now, yeah?
I am close to Detroit, but there are lots of wine grapes growing here. In fact, I would be remiss as a Michigan Wine Collaborative board member if I didn't say what I was drinking, which is, you can see the state of Michigan right here. This is a Domaine Berry and Syrah. So this is actually grown about an hour from Northwest Indiana. So for those people who don't realize that there are wine grapes in Michigan, they sure are.
Yeah, so we used to get in a pickup truck, and I can't remember. I think it was my dad's pickup truck. It might have even been your grandpa's. I don't remember. We used to go and fill the whole bed of this truck with two layers of white and red grapes, bushels. Remember the old wooden bushel baskets?
Yes.
Full, and yeah, I mean, such great memories.
Excellent. Yeah, no. And that's the thing, is that there are many ways to make grapes, and not a lot of people, I mean, if people are just starting out making wine, not everybody starts with grapes. Sometimes they start with juice. Sometimes they start with juice that has already been fermented into a base wine, and then they age it differently. But yeah, starting with the real deal is the best way to go.
So you grew up in this little town called Crown Point. We used to call it Crown Town. And so then, how old were you when you decided to make this your thing? I mean, your profession.
Oh, I was well into adulthood. It came about by accident, which, I mean, a happy accident, of course. But I remember standing in 2002, in the spring of 2002, I was standing at my old house in Rochester, New York, where I had moved to do an office equipment sales job. And so I was there washing dishes, and I was listening to CNN in the background, just the news as I was doing the dishes. And a story came on about a cork boat. And I was like, cork boat? What is this cork boat nonsense? And I just kind of kept listening. And it turns out that it was a guy who made an entire boat out of corks sailing down the Douro River in Portugal. And I stopped what I was doing, and I'm like, okay, this is too cool. I have to watch it. I was watching that video. I'm like, that is the craziest thing. How cool that someone followed their passion. They're doing this crazy voyage down the Douro River in a hand-built boat made out of wine corks. It was huge. It was actually made to resemble the port barges, I guess, that go down the Douro River, that would take the port from the vineyards to the houses where they would be sold in Porto. And I'm like, that is the coolest story ever. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call from a headhunter. I was selling office equipment, which was not my passion, but it paid the bills. And I got a call from a headhunter saying, would you like to be in the wine industry? From an old resume that I wasn't even circulating. I wasn't actively looking for a job. And I said, well, I like wine, so lay it on me. Let's see. And the rest is history. I went through some interviews with the company that had donated the corks for the cork boat that I had watched on CNN. I'm like, wow, if that's not a sign from the universe, I don't know what is. So I'm like, I am definitely meant to be here. So I sold corks and capsules and closures, everything that went on the top of the bottle. So this little decoration on the top of the bottle right here, I would sell these, synthetic corks, natural corks, screw caps, the cages that go on top of champagne that you have to open before the cork flies out of there. And I did that for 13 years, but then that company built a cooperage, and I really decided that I loved talking to clients about the cooperage side, and a cooperage is a place that builds barrels. For those people who are
Oh,
not familiar
okay.
with that term,
Okay.
so our company started building barrels, and I loved it because I was up here talking to the winemakers about how to put a cap or finish on top of the bottle once the wine was completely made. And I thought it was the coolest thing to dive into the bottle and really participate in the winemaking. I had a lot of experience talking to winemakers in the production area of wineries for years and years, but this was a chance to really taste and help steer the direction of the wine based on what they wanted to do with their oak, whether they wanted it to be really big and oaky, or they didn't want any oak flavor, but they needed something to give the wine some oomph. It was really a nice way to do that. And so I decided that in order to do that very well, I would have to get some more certifications. And that's where my sommelier certification came in, as well as my certified specialist of wine certification came in, because I wanted my clients, I was having a little trouble with credibility in the tasting aspect. People knew me as the cork lady. So, for 13 years, I was their cork lady, and they trust and still do. I still have clients calling me asking about corks. But I decided I need to have a third-party verification of my palate to make sure that I'm tasting what I think I'm tasting, and to ensure my clients that what I'm telling them is true, because wine tasting is very subjective. I mean, I can taste this, and say, oh, it tastes like, there's a hint of salami and blackberries. And people might look at me and be like, what are you talking about? I don't get salami. I get, prosciutto or something like that. So, it's very subjective. And so I wanted something that was a little bit more objective, so that people could say, okay, this is you have had other people verify that you can pick out particular aromas and characteristics of wine. And so that's what caused me to pursue the certifications. So that's kind of
So this sommelier, this is how it's pronounced, sommelier, Sommeleier.
Yes, correct.
And
Yes.
and what is the book definition of that, sommelier?
The book definition, it's kind of funny, because the book definition is anybody who serves wine at a restaurant or some other place that's serving food. So the definition is a wine steward.
So if I pour wine into this glass, I'm officially a sommelier.
And you serve it, and you're working at a restaurant serving it to people. So it is a profession. But if you are working at a restaurant serving it to people, then you are a sommelier. It actually doesn't require any certification, but the Court of Master Sommeliers, as well as several other sommelier groups that have accreditation, have decided to give certifications, so that it's kind of proof of wine knowledge. That's all. It's a piece of paper, but it shows that you went through some rigorous training and testing to ensure that you have the knowledge that you say you do. So it's simplified, and that's why I went for it, because the only restaurant experience I have is asking people in the Dairy Queen drive-through if they would like whipped cream and nuts with their sundae. So there's that's the extent of my restaurant experience. And I knew I would never, that's not my gig. I knew that that's not something that I would end up doing. But I wanted to make sure that I had a breadth of knowledge, because in those 13 years that I was working with the cork company, I was mainly serving Eastern North America. So everything kind of east of the Mississippi River, a little bit west of there, or east of the Rockies. So I wanted to make sure that my palate was not only attuned to those wines, but that I had an understanding of where those wines fit on the world stage. So how do these wines fit in comparison to California, or wines from France or Italy or Australia or New Zealand, or Georgia or China? I mean, wine is grown everywhere. So having a benchmark for comparison is also extremely important, because the thing that I warn winemakers most about is being careful not to get what's called a cellar palate, or even a regional palate, which is only drinking your own wines. Because if you're only comparing your wines to your own wines, there's not necessarily going to be, you might improve your methods and improve what's happening in your winery, but you don't necessarily know where you fit in relation to your neighbors, in relation to what you're competing with on the shelf space at the stores. So, you know, it's very important to understand this is who we are and this is how we fit into the world wine stage.
That's great. Hey, I just have to say, for all of you that are watching or are going to watch this, can you tell this woman's got a little bit of passion about wine?
Well, these guys already know that I'm crazy. Jason has traveled with me on a group called Taste Camp that is run by our friend Len Thompson, who it's basically a gathering for writers and bloggers to discover emerging regions. Joe is my friend in Ohio. He is a wine grower and winemaker who is amazingly has time away from the harvest. It might be raining in Ohio today, but and Adam is also a winemaker in Michigan and a consultant. So
Wow.
if anybody who's watching needs a gig, Adam is a consultant and is happy to help. So, and John, I don't know you, but welcome.
John, if that's the right John, I didn't see some of the other people on my thread. I don't know why they're not the same, but John is a professional photographer. He's been on before. Hello, John. How's it going, buddy? Hope everything is going well. He travels all over the country and does photography. He's amazing. Marching bands, just wow. We've got someone from Thailand, new member, Michael Francis Blanchard. Yusra from Cairo, Egypt. My buddy and former neighbor Ed is watching. Hani is a runner. He's just he just got his picture on a poster in, I believe it is Lebanon. So anyway, we've got a great audience and
wine in all those places too.
Yeah.
So something everybody can relate to.
I want to know, did you have to go someplace like to get this certification as a sommelier?
You know,
or you did it online? I mean, I don't know.
Yes and no. For one of my certifications, I was able to take it online at a proxy center that was approved by the governing body, I guess. For the Court of Master Sommeliers, I did have to take an introductory course. There are 4 levels. So just to give the people who are watching a basis for comparison, a lot of people have had more awareness of sommeliers in the last several years because of the movie Somm. So that is the absolute highest level of achievement in the Court of Master Sommeliers when you become a master sommelier. So those guys are under extreme pressure. I certainly have to wait till my kids are out of the house to start studying for something like that, because it is almost a full-time job. And most of those people have significant experience in the industry, with significant experience with service, because again, being the definition of a sommelier is someone who is a wine steward. So the test consists of a service component where you have to serve based on the rules set forth by the court. You have to learn theory. So you have to learn they give you a lot of books to study from, but it's basically saying pretty much learn everything that you can about wine and the traditional wine regions, grapes, methods of winemaking, etc. How to serve it temperature wise, and in what types of glasses, etc. Where they should be placed on the table. But then also there's a blind tasting component. And again, that was really my goal in studying through the court, was to say, okay, is my tongue telling me what I think it is? Are my taste buds bad? But so there are 4 levels. I'm a level 2. You have to go through the introductory level course, and then once you're done and you take a test at the end of that day, you get a certificate. The second component, which is definitely a notch up, is a certified sommelier. So the level 2 sommelier certification, you typically do not take right after the introductory course, because it takes a lot more study. Luckily, having been in the industry for, I don't know, 15 years by that point, I already had a fairly significant breadth of knowledge of wine. But the beautiful thing about wine is it teaches you every day that you know nothing about wine. So, you know, it's one of those things that the more you study, the more you realize you will never know it all, which is great. I mean, because I can't imagine mastering something and then being done. I mean, the wine luckily gives you something to study more every day. After this, the certification level, the level 2 certification of sommeliers, there's an advanced sommelier, which it requires exponentially more study than the level 2 certification, and the master sommelier is virtually impossible. There are a couple hundred of them in the entire world. I am proud to say that the first female sommelier, master sommelier, is from Michigan. She's right in Metro Detroit, so we're super proud of her. So, but anyway, so it's a very, very small and elite group because it's almost impossible to pass. Their level of service knowledge is completely different. When you're doing the blind tasting component of the level 2 certification, you have to get you have to guess the wine based on the color, based on the level of alcohol, the flavors and aromas that you can pick up, and you have to get it. They're almost always going to be major grapes that everybody knows. It's not going to be, you still have to do a lot of deductive reasoning, which is part of their training. But you don't have to guess vintage year. You don't have to guess exact country. You might have to say, is this warm climate or cool climate? Is it less than 3 years old or between 5 and 10 years old? You do have to have certain things, but it's not as exact as it has to be for a master. Because
so what you're saying basically is that you just can't drink your way into the wine industry.
You probably can. I mean, there are so many different ways to do it. I mean, right now I sell barrels. So, when I was with the cork company for 13 years and loved the barrel component, they basically told me during a meeting one time that the CEO of that company said, we didn't know that I had tied into a call. And the big bunch of their salespeople and their sales were focused in California, because at the end of the day, that's where the money is. There's a lot of wine being produced there. There are 8,000-ish, maybe 8,500 wineries in the United States, and like 4,700 of them are in California. So this is definitely a big moneymaker for suppliers in that region. But I had been dedicatedly serving the Eastern North America for 13 years, and I loved my clients. I love the wines that they make. They're definitely different from California, but I prefer them. They're very food friendly. They go with anything. And I loved my customers. And so during a conference call meeting one time, the CEO didn't know I had tied in, and they were picking out target accounts. They were assigning target accounts to people. And someone in the California office said, well, what about Gina's territory? What about Eastern North America? And the CEO's response was, Smelly Barn Winery in Missouri is not going to take us to the promised land. And I was just like, what? What did he just say? And it took everything I had not to unmute the phone, because I was like, I had to cool down a little bit first. Being Italian, I had to calm my hothead temper a little bit. So, but anyway, that was the moment when I decided to start my company. Was, wow, I can't believe that they don't think this is a viable wine growing industry on this side of the country. They don't understand what's happening here. And I do, and I love it. And I think that we need to just make sure that we have the products for these people. I'm going to serve them with 1,000% enthusiasm, and not as the afterthought. And a lot of suppliers sadly think that way. Just because it's a smaller industry, it's growing, it's emerging. They're working with grapes that maybe people who've been making wine in California for 30 years have never heard of. But that doesn't mean it's not a great industry. So, you can, if you come by accident to the wine industry, you could start by working in a tasting room on weekends and just, teaching customers about the wines that are just in your winery. But typically what happens then is that people's curiosity is piqued. And once you learn a little bit about wine, you want to learn more. It's kind of a contagious thing, which is super cool. And like we were talking about yesterday, everybody has some sort of story about wines. Everybody can relate to wine somehow. It's not like, if you're talking to an engineer at NASA, you may not have something, in common with that guy or gal, but with wine, you have some sort of story or some connection to it.
And it goes back to, how many millions of years ago were they drinking wine? Like
thousands of years. That one guy who turned water into wine. So he's kind of famous for that. And people still do it. They just do it a different way.
So tell us about your company. So eventually decided to go completely independent, start your own gig, and there was a transition. There must have been some sort of crossover. I don't know. Did you just go cold turkey and just dive into it, or how did that all come about?
No, I started kind of researching what I would do, and I took a couple steps that weren't necessarily in the right direction at first, but I knew I had to leave my organization, and that was hard because it was kind of not necessarily a comfort zone, because I always appreciated my customers and tried to give 150% every day. But obviously, striking out on your own is scary. I After I left, I got a nasty gram from my previous employer of 13 years saying, we will bury you if you compete against us. And I was like,
Wow.
wow, I didn't expect that after all those years of service. So that was scary, because I thought, oh no, are they going to take my house or my, firstborn child? What's going to happen? But I decided that they probably weren't interested in either of those things. And it probably was part of protocol, and moved on and found suppliers that I thought would make barrels that would complement the wines that my clients are making. And that was actually my biggest problem at where I was before, is that the wines, because California is the big moneymaker for most cooperages, whether those cooperages who build barrels, whether they're building them in the United States, whether they're building them in, there are a lot of cooperages in France. There are a lot of cooperages, there's several in Spain. Those are the main areas where people are coopering barrels, but they do come from other areas. The oak comes from all over the place. But I wanted something that would work very well with cool climate wines without clobbering the fruit. So, sometimes you'll hear people swirling, you'll see someone swirling wine and they'll say, oh, this is a big oaky California Chardonnay. My clients are making the opposite of that typically. You don't want a wine, in my opinion, and again, it's very subjective, to taste like you're sucking on a 2x4. You want to make sure that the expression of the fruit is the best that it can possibly be, that the client or that the consumer has a connection with the fruit, so they can taste, oh, this is, I taste the grapes, I taste some of these other influencing characters. You don't really want wood to be something that is one of the major components. You almost want it to be in the background, or like the glass that holds up the wine, but not to be detectable as necessarily a major flavor component.
What's
So that was
the
what I
name
was
of
after.
your company?
Okay, so the name of the company, and I'm laughing because I thought I was so clever when I was naming it. I'm like, everybody's going to get this. It's hard to spell, it's hard to pronounce, and nobody knows what it means. So out
It's
of
unique.
obscurity, I picked Petraea Plus. So the origin of the word Petraea is it is the type of oak tree that is French oak, Quercus petraea. So Quercus is the oak species, and Petraea is the type of tree. So
Spell it. P.
it's Petraea. So I have people spell it all kinds of ways, and they say Petraeus a lot of times, like that old General David Petraeus. It's not named after him. So
Okay.
it's definitely not named after him. So yeah, but it's Quercus petraea, and the plus is because I have oak alternatives as well. So if somebody is not necessarily in a position to buy a barrel, because barrels are a big ticket item that wineries have to purchase, they are not inexpensive. An average French oak barrel goes for around $1,000. And an average American barrel these days, they used to be much cheaper, but these days they go for anywhere from $500 to $700. So they're
Wow.
not inexpensive. As far as, I used to sell corks that were between, a penny and 10 cents. Some went up to $1. So it's a different item. But for those people who are not in a position to buy a $1,000 oak barrel, they can use oak staves and pieces of oak that go into a barrel or a tank that will impart some of the same flavors without the same price tag. Or if they don't have the time that it takes for wine to develop and integrate in a barrel, they can use oak alternatives. And because they're smaller and have a lot more surface area, that will integrate into the wine faster. So a lot of times I get calls from winemakers saying, I'm bottling in 2 months. What can you do? And we can help them.
Well, I think it's really interesting and unique. I mean, that you chose a name that, although is difficult to spell and difficult to pronounce, it has a meaning that people in the industry will understand and know. And for the average person, you know, I never knew what that meant until just now. And I've always been curious to, you know, to find out what that hidden meaning was.
Yes.
And
Why did you pick this ridiculous word?
it just goes to show you
and you'd
that
be surprised because not everybody in the industry knows either.
Oh, really? Well,
yeah, not everybody in the industry knows.
The thing that I love about it is that it's like I'm very attracted to the passion that you have about it, and just choosing the name shows that it's like it's in your system, it's in your blood, it's in your, you know, it's in your head, it's in everywhere. It's, you know, you're just, it's all about you.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and well, it's really funny because you become kind of enamored with oak trees in this business because there are so many ties. When I was with corks, natural cork is harvested from the bark of a tree called Quercus suber. So, you know, again, it's that oak species. And so when I was switching over to barrels and it was Quercus Petraea, Quercus robur, and Quercus alba, I'm like, well, this is right up my alley. I love all these trees. So, you know, wine and wood has an historic relationship too. I mean, it's kind of a neat thing. Now, certainly there are other ways to make wine, and a lot of technology has changed things so that there are other closures and other ways to age wine without wood. But traditionally, they do have this long-standing relationship and this marriage.
It seems to me that maybe back in the olden days that, you know, they didn't have ways to make containers. They probably first started putting them in clay pots, and then decided to make bigger containers out of barrels, but you know, whatever. That was sort of a natural evolution.
Absolutely.
That's what I think, but I don't know if that's true.
It is true. In fact, kind of what's old is new. I have clients now who are going back to amphora, which are the clay pots that were, you know, the terracotta pots that were first used for storing wine. The problem that they didn't stop using them because they're still used in many areas, especially in the Middle East, the birthplace of winemaking, because they're still used, but they're not used to transport wine. Really, what the evolution of the barrel came around because of transportation. When people started trading wine and realized that this is a commodity and they needed to move it around, barrels were easy to roll. They wouldn't break. They were shockingly liquid resistant because the oak swells up to seal any leaks. People don't realize that oak barrels are not made with any glue or adhesives or anything that, you know, no plastics, nothing. They're just made by bending the wood. And once you fill it with liquid, it swells up so that it is watertight. It's kind of a cool thing. I mean, I think this is what I liked about it too. It's like, it's the universe made these to be used. Same thing with corks. I'm just like, who'd have thought that the bark of a tree would go perfect with wine and would be watertight, and also resistant to a lot of pests. I mean, these trees are as strong as hell. I mean, they resist fires and everything and come through them okay. And so that's why I think I'm also intrigued with it is it's tradition, but that's how that came about. You're right. When they started transporting wine, they needed something that wouldn't break, and transporting the amphora was too difficult. But the amphora actually give some really interesting characteristics now. And a lot of my clients, it's come full circle, what's old is new. They are using amphora that they either bury in the vineyard and ferment in a buried clay pot in the back of the vineyard, or they're using them in the wine cellar next to their barrels. It gives a different type of development of the wine, that the air can still move in. It's porous, so the air can still move in and out, and the wine can develop, but it doesn't have the aromatics and the toastiness and the wood characteristics that you get from oak. So it just adds another tool and dimension to winemaking. Again,
This is amazing to me. You mentioned some people in your feed, and I'm
Mhm.
interested to know, have you, uh, who were your mentors? Have you had some people that you have, you know,
Oh yeah.
been a disciple of to teach you along the way?
Winemakers. Oh my God, winemakers. The thing that I have to say about the wine industry, and I also, just for my barrel business, I also work with distillers and brewers and cider makers and mead makers. And I have to say that I've learned so much working with all of them, but there is something inherent about wine that is all about sharing. It's about sharing information. It's about sharing food. I've never been with more people who eat off each other's plates in my life than if you're at a dinner with winemakers. They'll be like, "Oh, what do you have? What do you have? Here, taste this, taste this." You know, you're in the cellar, you're tasting, you're drinking from the same glass. I mean, it's all about sharing wine, sharing food, sharing germs, because sharing fruit flies in fermentation season, which is now everybody who's bringing grapes in now and fermenting in their cellars, they're full of bees and fruit flies. But winemakers will share information, and they were very kind to me as I was coming up as an office supply salesperson, new to the wine industry. I had no formal instruction for 13 years. I just learned everything I did from winemakers, wine books, tasting in the cellar, and them being kind enough to share information with me and help teach me. So they're
Wow.
wonderful people. And I think it's because it is a passion industry. People don't get into the wine industry to make $1 million. They made $1 million somewhere else and lose $1 million in the wine industry because it is so cost and labor intensive. It's all about passion. People are in wine because they want to be, and they like that connection with other people. I think that's why people go so crazy over wine. When you're with a group of wine people and they're going nuts over a particular glass of wine and talking about what they smell and what they taste and where it's from and how old it is the biggest bunch of nerds you've ever seen in your life. But it's awesome. I mean, it's so they're it, it's a real person to person connection that you don't find, let's say, in postage meters or copiers, which I had the joy of selling prior to becoming a wine person.
From copiers to wine. That's a
Yes.
pretty dramatic jump.
Yeah. Well, I was an English
So,
major in college, so what are you going to do with that? You got to be in
yeah,
sales.
exactly.
So.
Drink wine.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And
Exactly.
strangely, I didn't really, again, as a young person, I think young people now, because of technology, have so much access to information about wine. When I turned 21, I had no idea what wine to buy. I mean, I probably bought Sutter Home White Zinfandel. I'm positive. I have no idea. But now young people have such access to information about wine,
Mm-hmm.
and they're very adventurous. If you look at the data on millennials and younger, they are really adventurous with trying new wines and not having necessarily preconceived notions about what wine should be or being intimidated by wine. They're willing to try it. Whereas when I was 21, I thought, I don't know anything about wine. I don't want to potentially waste $25 on this bottle of wine and not like it. How will I know? So I think that the goal for all of us in the wine industry should be to make wine fun and approachable and make it so people can enjoy it and have fun, because again, it's all about sharing. And if people are curious about wine, if they ask the person at their store who's in charge of the beverages, that person will talk their ear off about what they could try. The goal of any good wine steward in a retail setting at Jewel Osco or at the grocery store or at Costco should be, or at a restaurant, should be to help people find wine that they'll like, because
Mm-hmm.
it's grape juice at the end of the day. It's
Right.
grape juice that has required a lot of care and a lot of hard work and a lot of
I'll
blood, sweat, and
bet. It's a
tears.
lot of hard work.
But it's also, on the consumer side, they should not be worried about picking the wrong bottle, because I think part of the fun in wine is the adventure. Is this going to be good? Is it going to be terrible? Oh well, it's not the end of the world. There's more where that came from. Don't get discouraged if you find a bottle that's not to your liking. Take it back to your liquor store and say, hey, this wasn't quite what I was after. what, I kind of like these flavors. What do you have? Or those people should be there to help and help people decide what they want to consume. But and there's so many variations of wine these days that there's something for everybody.
Yeah, if I was a newbie, right, and I just was interested in learning more, or I wanted to become, part of this industry, knowing what you know after, however many years you said, 15, 13?
Oh gosh. Yeah, now it's 16. So I'm getting old.
Okay, 16. So what would you say? So you say, Domenic, hold on for a second. Let me give you some advice. What would you say to me?
Well, it helps to live in wine country. So when I started working in wine, part of the reason I was hired was I had a pulse, number one, and I lived in wine country. I lived where they were hiring. I was in Rochester, New York, which is very close to the Finger Lakes region of New York. So I was able to commute every day into wine country and talk to winemakers. There are tons of jobs in the wine industry if you're near where they're growing grapes, because you
Okay.
can work in a tasting room. If you are a salesperson or you like interacting with people, you can pour wine in a tasting room. You can volunteer at wineries. You can work in the vineyard. They always need people to work in vineyards because even in the dead of winter, there's a lot of hard work that goes into growing grapes. You have to be out in January or February in 10 below sometimes, pruning and tying the grapevines so that they'll be positioned well for the coming vintage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's brutal work, but they need people to do it. Cellar work, you can always volunteer with zero wine knowledge to work in a cellar, because they need people to drive forklifts around and move barrels around and hook hoses up to pumps. And so, you learn on the fly. A lot of times you can have zero wine knowledge. So there are many things to do with wine production in wine country. If you want to get a job in wine outside of wine country, it's a little more challenging. And I face this now in Detroit. So luckily I started my own company, but I have to travel to my clients because there are a very limited number of my clients who are making wine and growing grapes in the Metro Detroit area. There are a couple who are on the wine collaborative board with me. So that is awesome. But Detroit is kind of a beer and whiskey town. So the best way to get into wine would be to sell wine, either in a retail situation, at a grocery store, at a liquor store,
Mm-hmm.
or to sell wine in a wholesale situation where you work for a distributor. So many of the states in the United States have what's called a 3-tier system, where the producer, who is the winery, has to sell their wine, or can sell their wine. If they want it widely distributed, they sell their wine to a wholesaler. So the wholesalers buy the wine at wholesale prices from the liquor store, from the winery, and then they sell to restaurants, liquor stores, um, uh, grocery chains, that kind of thing. And so they would sell into the retail situation. So you could easily get a job in wine in one of those situations where you're selling wine in a restaurant directly to consumers, selling wine in a retail situation at a grocery store or liquor store directly to consumers, or from a wholesaler to retailers, restaurants, etc.
So there's all
So
sorts of opportunity.
there's so many opportunities. One of the big opportunities now, and this sometimes requires being near the winery, but not always, thanks to technology, is social media marketing. So a lot of wineries, it's very, very important that they connect with consumers on a regular basis. I love a lot of wineries bought into this idea 10 years ago, and they're the ones that are ahead of the game. But sometimes people have been making wine for years. They've been selling wine out of their tasting room, but they don't know how to reach beyond that, and they don't spend a lot of time on social media. And as you know, you have done social media marketing, so you understand that it takes time and consistent connections and consistent promotions, and keeping your company or idea in front of clients. And so wineries that don't have experience with that can hire social media marketers as brand ambassadors, people who will keep brand awareness raise brand awareness of their wines and their winery and their message.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also something that is a new thing for the wine industry.
And if somebody's into social media marketing, and they could probably do some volunteer work to start, just to,
Mm-hmm.
get their foot in the door and like that. That's awesome. What are some of the challenges that you've had to face over the last, 16 years, and with your with starting your company?
Just the standard entrepreneurial challenges of not having any idea what I was doing, having worked for other people my whole life. And then all of a sudden
Heard this
saying,
a lot.
yeah, exactly. Like, oh, what do you mean I need a lawyer and an accountant and to file with the IRS to get a business number and all these things? I mean, certainly some of it's common sense, but it was a lot of learning on the go and just saying, okay, these are the boring business aspects, because that obviously is not all drinking wine all day. That's the paperwork aspect, and
Right.
learning to use QuickBooks, which is super easy, but annoying because I don't like to use QuickBooks. I don't like to do accounting. But as a one-person company, you kind of have to you pick your battles. You have to do the accounting. That's just, so you pick a day every month and you file your receipts and you keep track of everything, and that's the way it goes. The other challenge is making sure that I see my clients enough. For me personally, and this is why a lot of companies that have been California or France focused have not necessarily succeeded in the Eastern United States, is because it is so spread out. It's about 19.2 million square miles of area to cover. And so
Wow.
It's not as if you're in Napa and you're just driving up Highway 29 and you can throw a stone and hit 500 wineries. So time and territory management for me, from a sales aspect, has been incredibly challenging, only because I only have so much time. I have 2 little kids. I've got a husband who has a challenging job that causes him to travel as well. And so it's a lot of juggling and work-life balance, which, is kind of a trite expression, but it's really true. I think wine is an industry that is constantly calling on people to focus on their passion. So I think for wine people, and I'm probably making a big generalization, it should be easier to strike a work-life balance, because you theoretically believe in honoring what you're passionate about. And so for me, I always make sure that I have that balance, and I don't travel more than a couple weeks per month. And if I do travel a couple weeks per month, I'm balanced around, the 5th grade choir program and the karate tournament and all these things. So, because at the end of the day, that's life, and there's more to life than work. But the fun part is that when I am at work, I can be all in, because of that balance, because I've struck a very happy equilibrium with my personal life. I'm able to say, okay, when I am traveling, it's nice because I get on a plane and I leave home kind of behind. I check in with them every day, but I leave them behind, and I'm able to give my customers 100% of my attention. So that's been, I would say, the trickiest part. But, at the end of the day, the company's not going to be there for you on your deathbed. The people are. So, I'm always a big advocate of reminding people of what's important.
It's really important, the work-life balance, especially when you have such a strong passion. I mean, it's just, you've got to have it. It's got to be there, and the kids have to be happy. Where have you traveled for?
Oh gosh.
I mean, yeah.
Not as many places as I want to go, but so for my suppliers, which have historically been in Europe, my current supplier is in the Burgundy region of France, so that's awful to visit, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
It's Caduce Cooperage is in Burgundy. They're in La Dois-Serigny, which is a small town very close to Beaune in Burgundy, and it's absolutely gorgeous because there's vineyards everywhere. The wines are amazing, and they're very good people. I like working with them. They're wonderful. Prior to this, when I was with Corks, I got to go to Portugal to see the cork forest, because corks do indeed grow on trees, unlike money. So you see the cork forests, where they grow, the different forestry methods, which I was also fortunate enough to see when I went to my French cooperage. I got to see the French oak trees that used to be grown for building ships for war. So that's why they are so tall and so dense, because they were historically grown for warships. So so that's cool. So if you're a tree nerd, cork and barrels are a fun thing to do. I've been to Spain several times because that's where our capsule manufacturer was. And then when I went to when I go to see my clients, I travel all over. I've been many times to California in my previous job, all over Napa and Sonoma, and down to the central coast of California, and almost to the border of Mexico. I mean, they make wine very far south in California, all over British Columbia, because they make wine there, in Canada, as well as all the wine growing regions in the eastern United States and Canada. So the eastern Canada is concentrated mainly in Ontario. There is winemaking in Quebec and Nova Scotia as well.
Wow.
And then in Nova Scotia, I hope to get to very, very soon, because my mom's side of the family has a Nova Scotia heritage. So it'd be kind of cool to see some of my McDougall relatives in Nova Scotia, but also, and see if any of them are making wine, because that would be crazy. But also in the United States, my travels are fairly concentrated to Michigan. Michigan is a top 5 wine state.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia, the largest concentration of my customers now are in Virginia. New York, in the Finger Lakes, on Long Island, on the eastern end of Long Island, as well as the Hudson Valley and Western New York are making wine. And then all over the Midwest, Ohio, Pennsylvania, in the Northeast, Vermont, New Hampshire, everybody's making wine.
And these are all considered to be cool climate.
They are. Yeah, I believe cool climate is officially defined as, in the summer months, the average is less than, I believe, or all year round, the average is less than 55 degrees. So that would be the majority of my territory. If you're thinking of traditional warm climates, I mean, Australia is usually warm climate. California is warm climate. A lot of Mediterranean areas are warm climate, very warm and temperate.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing about warm climates is they can also have cool microclimates, and a microclimate is defined as anything that's even down to one vine or one cluster of grapes, because there's a certain weather pattern that hits in this very tiny area that is different from the rest of the vineyard. So there are cool climate regions of California. There are cool climate regions of in the Southern Hemisphere as well that you wouldn't normally consider cool. But so it kind of just depends. But anywhere that sees any snow on the ground is typically, you're safe to call it a cool climate.
Mm-hmm. Wow. This is so intriguing. So intriguing. I see some other people that are on. I wonder if anybody has any questions for you. If you're still on and watching, and you have any questions for Gina, please type them in. I see your mother is on. There you go. Hi,
My
Mom.
If your mom's not a fan, then who's going to be?
That's right. I think that you're going to have a lot of fans after this. I've been to Australia and did a wine tour there. It was an all-day tour. And what I remember was that was with a group of people. We went to several wineries. We had a blast all day. And then it was this long trip home after we had drank several, probably bottles of wine each in total. We're all on this bus just, can we just be home now? But
and,
it was,
and that happens. You can get fatigued easily seeing a ton of wineries. When I'm telling people, if they're interested in tasting, I'm just like, oh gosh, limit it to like 3 or 4 wineries if you can, because then you can really experience it. You can have great conversations with whoever's pouring. If you want to nerd out, I mean, there will be people at those vineyards who would be happy to talk with you at length. and tell you all about the history of the wine, the history of the family, why they made wine at that location, all those fun things. But after a while, if you're on a bus and you're going from winery to winery to winery to winery, it doesn't necessarily help. I mean, it's fun. It's definitely a fun day, but it doesn't necessarily help you, because when you go back to try to remember about what you tasted, you're like, where did we go? What did we taste? And it's hard to recall.
Exactly.
And it doesn't necessarily help the wineries, because by the fifth winery, your taste buds are dead. So
exactly.
They aren't necessarily going to sell you a case of wine. They may, because you may be like, woohoo, I'll take 3 of these cases, because you don't know what it tastes like, and you've had several glasses or bottles during the day. But they won't necessarily make a lifelong fan out of you, because you didn't necessarily experience the winery in its absolute best light. It's one of those things where they might sell 1 case to you, but they won't necessarily have you coming back, because you might get this case home and be like, now, why did I buy this? So I always advise people, max out at maybe 3-4 wineries, eat lunch during the day. Definitely, if the wineries don't provide food, keep some goldfish crackers in your purse. That's a mom secret. Something you should always have handy. Drink plenty of water. Those are the ways to have a successful wine tasting.
Yeah, that's great. Your mom says she has impeccable taste in wine. Love all my gifts.
Well, yeah, if you find people, gosh, I have to say, when I find people who like to receive wine, that's it. Like, I'm not going to give them anything else for the rest of their lives. I hope they realize they're stuck with it.
Yeah.
So,
well, I remember sending you a message asking you for some recommendations, and I still have the note. I don't remember what it says, but that's probably something that a lot of people would like to get, is a recommendation on wines. So I think that we're about at almost at an hour, and I'm thinking maybe we should shut it down for now. This is so intriguing. You're so intriguing and full of knowledge. I would really love to have you come back and continue.
Well, thank you for having me, because like I said, it's lovely to see your smiling face in the middle of the week. So that's always fun. I don't get a chance to talk to all of my cousins every day. And also to, hopefully connect with people. Again, the best thing about wine that I can say is it really provides, whether you're enjoying it over a meal with friends or family, or on a business trip and sitting by yourself, or you are in a winery crushing grapes and eagerly anticipating what this harvest is going to bring. How is this wine going to turn out after, like my poor people in Virginia right now are harvesting grapes almost in the midst of a hurricane. They've had an unprecedented amount of rain through the season. It's a mess, and they're persevering, and they'll pull it off. It's one of those things where it's not ideal, but they're pulling together, and we're all still eagerly anticipating what the 2018 vintage is going to provide. It's like a surprise in the bottle every single time. So, again, wine is something that everyone can relate to, and that they should investigate, because there's an enormous amount that we will never know, but that provides a daily dose of discovery every day.
Well, I've always felt that I've had this sort of a in the industry with you, so you're amazing. Thank you so much for being on, and for sharing all your knowledge, and we'll definitely have you back. For all of you out there who are watching or are going to watch later on, I salute you, and here's to you, Gina.
Yes, salute, cheers.
Salute. Thank you so much.
All right, bye, Domenic.
Okay, and those of you out there, Gina, great example. Live your passion, evolve your passion, share your passion. Love you.
Thanks, Domenic. Have a great day.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.